she's the only one. Are you guys able to see if she's in the right place?
Yeah, I do see her as an attendee.
Okay, perfect.
In about
I'll let her know.
Jennifer, in about 2 minutes, let her know we're going live. She can't see us because we haven't started the stream, but in about literally 2 minutes, we're going to go live.
Sounds good. I'll let her know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Your mics are going to be hot in 2 minutes. Councilor Scully and Mayor Pro-Tem Sites. Just not that that would ever be a problem for anybody, but it has been sometimes. Not for us, fortunately. I don't think we've dealt with anything like that. Many other councils have.
And Don, just a quick recommendation. I'm not seeing a ton of people. I feel like our board members might, we might get a couple of late stragglers. So we will be hot, like you said, in about a minute or two. If you can maybe just give everybody a quick filler and just say, hey, thank you, we still have people joining, et cetera, before you launch into your remarks, it might be good to get a little bit more attendance when we get going.
Would you like me to do that 7:28 or the starting time 7:30?
Yeah, no, 7:30, please. 7:30.
Thank you.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, folks. We're going to be taking just a few more minutes here. We have folks coming online, and when I'm given the go-ahead, we'll begin our meeting, but it will be just a few minutes after 7:30 to make sure everyone who wants to come on tonight is brought into our meeting. Thank you for your patience.
Good evening, everyone. I want to say thank you and welcome for coming. If you're just joining us now, we're going to get started. I'd like to introduce our city manager, Don Tripp.
Abby, thank you very, very much. I'm joined tonight by several of our city councilors on the screen with, and I want to welcome Mayor Pro-Tem Sites, Councilors Scully and Voles, and I think Councilor Smith has joined us, and Councilor Seymour. Thanks all of you to being here this evening. I have the honor to do a bit of a greeting for you. I just want to, first of all, on behalf of the mayor and council, tell all of you how much we appreciate and are humbled by your service to the community. It's a remarkable thing when you see so many people who love their city so much are willing to put in time, take time away from their own lives and their families to contribute to our community. And very seriously, it's very humbling to have that. I'm just here tonight to tell you thank you, and to really say to you that from a staff standpoint and the services that we deliver, quality of life comes from a lot of different places in our lives. But I really do think that local government has as much or more influence over that than any other level of government and maybe any other institution in our worlds. When you think about getting up in the morning, that alarm going off and taking a shower and having reliable water, being able to get to work no matter how much snow there's been or what the conditions might be in the day, and then go to a good job. And hopefully that's maybe working here in Westminster, coming home and shopping and getting on a trail, and all the different things that we are able to provide for you. We're humbled to do that. We appreciate you as board members' support and the policies and the deliberation that goes into doing the things we need to do. This has been a tough year, admittedly, for all of us. Your city has continued to operate mostly intact in terms of all of its services, except for those interruptions that were required as a part of trying to fight this virus. But we've come through it really well. I'm really happy to report tonight that our finances are in much better condition than we thought they were going to be going into the pandemic. We went into the pandemic with really deep reserves, the deepest reserves in the city's history. The council made very wise decisions and investments in our business community to help them as much as they possibly could. The first city in the Front Range to really dip into our own reserves to help small businesses out immediately. So I think that the combination of people pulling together in this time has been remarkable. It's what you hope happens. It did happen here. And we're very optimistic moving into 2021, in part because we've got the spirit of folks like you working with us. So thank you. I want to tell you that on behalf of the staff and myself, we're available to you whenever you need us. Personally, for any of the boards that would like to have me come and speak to you or any of our staff speak to you about any issues of the city, we're always available to do that. It doesn't have to be in a group. You can also email me, contact any of us, and we really value that relationship. So thank you. Have a great evening, and my best wishes to you moving forward.
Thank you, Don. I also want to extend my welcome to everybody this evening. I'm Abby. I'm in the city clerk's office. And thank you for anybody who got the last minute link and was able to get on. I apologize for the mix-ups we had earlier this evening. So I'm going to speak to you this evening about the general overview of what it means to be a board or commission member and sort of general rules that you need to abide by. So next slide, please. So each board has a different role and duty. There are 9 boards within the city and they all do very different things. But some of the rules and expectations are the same for everybody on each board. For example, we want you to attend all your board meetings, even if you're the alternate. The alternates play an important role and they fill in as voting members when the regular members aren't there. So the attendance is important. You also have to develop bylaws, which are subject to city council approval, and the city council does review them regularly. And then you also have to elect a chair and a vice chair, and you do this on the first meeting of odd-numbered years. You have to be a board member for at least a year to be eligible, and you have to also if you have not been on the board for a year, no one on your board has been there a year, then you pick the most qualified person. And then if for some reason there's a resignation or a vacancy occurs during one of these terms, then your board will elect a new chair or vice chair, and they will only serve out the remainder of that term. And then they will have another election during the odd number years back on a regular schedule. Next slide, please. So you all have a council liaison that serves to your board. Those roles are chosen each year. So sometimes the council member stays for a few years with the board and sometimes they rotate. But the role of the council liaison is to be a communication window between the board and the council. The council member usually attends the board meetings and they get all the communications, and they report that back to the rest of council, to their colleagues, but they also report it at city council meetings so the public can know what the board is working on. They also let council know what actions the board recommends and things like that. Next slide, please. You also have a staff liaison who you probably know or have heard from at this point, and they are in charge of scheduling your meetings, preparing agendas, publishing hearing notices, which we'll discuss a little more in a minute, and they take the minutes. But your staff liaison has no real voting role in the board. That is all of you, and the staff member is just there to support administratively. Next slide, please. So there are rules that govern all the boards. Some of them come from the Westminster Municipal Code, and one of those is the attendance requirement. We really ask you to try to commit to attendance. Of course, there are excused absences, like if you have a family emergency or if you're sick, or even if you go on vacation. We ask that you notify your staff liaison or your chair at least 24 hours in advance. And if you have 4 consecutive unexcused absences or miss 25% of the meetings within a year, you are subject to removal. So that's just something to be aware of. Next slide, please. So another requirement that all the boards have are that your meetings are public. So that means they must be noticed, and that the way that happens is your staff liaison will post either on the bulletin board when City Hall is open or on the website. And a meeting happens when 3 or more board members are meeting about board business. This isn't if you go out to coffee together or something like that. It's if you are meeting to take action. The other thing too is minutes will be recorded, and those minutes become part of the permanent record with the city. And as quasi-judicial boards, your meetings are also audio recorded, so people can request those audio recordings. Next slide, please. And the time commitment differs by each board. Some of you will meet every other week, some of you will meet quarterly, and some of you will only meet on an as-needed basis. Your staff liaison has probably contacted you about a meeting pattern, but if not, they'll contact you shortly about the 2021 meeting schedule. Next slide, please. So last year, council wanted to engage boards even more. So we started doing goal setting with our boards. This was brand new last year. And in your binder, if you have your binder or in the materials that your staff liaison has sent you or will send you, there's a goal setting template. This template is not really meant to be like follow these steps rigidly, but like brainstorming. And you'll come up with these goals with your board as a whole. If you have not set up a goal setting session yet, your staff liaison will set that up soon. Then those goals are reported back to the clerk's office. And we ask for them no later than March 5th of this year, because they'll be reported back to City Council in a study session in late March or early April. Next slide, please. Oh, next up is the City Attorney's Office. Ron will present to you as to your legal duties. Thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the questions box, and we will get those answered. Ron, are you on?
That works.
Thanks, Ron.
So if I could get the quasi-judicial slides up, that'd be great. I want to say good evening to you all. It's been a while since we last talked to you. Last time we were in person, so this is a little different. I don't do a lot of presentations on this, so hoping that this one goes smoothly. But you all are here because you're on a quasi-judicial board, and all of our boards matter, but I think the quasi-judicial, since I do advise one, I kind of have a little stronger feelings for the quasi-judicials, and for that we do some really good work. So this is a similar presentation as what we had last time, but I think it's very important for all of our new members and a recap for everyone else. We also have had we talked last time about a 106 action, which is an appeal from a quasi-judicial board determination. I have some personal experience and stories to tell you from Special Permanent License Board, who has overcome a 106 appeal action this year, just recently. So I'll kind of loop in those stories through this presentation as well. Next slide, please. So there are two types of boards and commissions. First one would be advisory. Those are the types of boards that are just going to be advising city council on certain types of policy decisions, certain types of areas that they want to discuss, such as the inclusivity board may have different areas that they're talking about inclusivity within the city. The historic landmark board, although I think the historic landmark does do more than just advisory, but we have a youth panel. And then we have the quasi-judicial, which is what you all are that are here. And that is something where you're actually acting on behalf of city council, making specific determinations that bind the city itself. Next slide. And so kind of went over this already, but the advisory boards cannot make decisions on behalf of city council. They can just tell city council what that board has done. They don't speak for city council. They're really just there to advise. Next slide. Now, as I stated, you have, as a quasi-judicial board, you hold hearings. You can, because you make decisions on behalf of city council, you operate similar as on their behalf. So you're accepting testimony. You're open to the public, as Abby has stated. Even our advisories are open to the public, but you're actually able to take public statements, public input, testimony, and you issue decisions that are based on the delegation by city council to your board. Examples of these: planning commission, personnel, special permanent license board, all hear evidence, make decisions, make determinations on what's going to be binding upon the city. Next slide. So those decisions have to abide by I'll take the hierarchy, our municipal laws. They also have to abide by state law, and then at the very top are federal laws. So the Westminster Municipal Charter is kind of like our constitution for the city. And we have our own code that further fleshes out the charter. And so that's what we really have to follow in order to reach a conclusion. Just as a state court or a federal court has to follow the state or federal statutes that are provided, we have to follow the code. In some senses, we do have to follow state statute as well, such as the Special Permanent License Board. There is an entire liquor licensing statutory scheme that's set up at the state that gives the city's power to regulate, but we still have to abide by the state rules, and we can't go beyond what the state allows us to do. So we still have to follow that along with our municipal law, but you're essentially acting like a court in a much more relaxed, laid back atmosphere compared to what courts can be, but by no means is it just a free-for-all, laid back. I've been in part of the Special Permanent License Board on any kind of hearings we have. I've been on the personnel board on the other side defending the city, and they're by no means to say that it is very lighthearted. It's very serious, but you don't have to follow all the exact same rules as such as a federal court, which people can get pretty scolded in there if they don't do exactly as the court wants. The state courts have to accept the quasi-judicial body's finding the facts, so long as there's a record of that body includes evidence to support that. So courts give deference, essentially, is what that comes down to your decisions on how you decide the quasi-judicial matters that come before you. The court doesn't look at it again and say, well, we're going to just redo this hearing. We don't think the Westminster board did what we think they should have done, so we're going to reverse it. They don't do that. They give you deference to say, you know, we really have to go above and beyond to find a reason why the body shouldn't have done that. And that typically comes down to you didn't follow the municipal code or you didn't follow state statute. Not that they would have come to a different conclusion based on the facts presented, but it really comes down to law. So that's why it's very important to know what the pertinent municipal laws and the state laws, and each of these boards should have a representative from the city attorney's office that is a liaison to the board to help advise you and train you on those things. I know the personnel board doesn't have one from the city. We have an independent outside counsel because the matters that come before them are matters that are internal with the city. So we want to keep our independence, and some of the other boards will also get outside counsel when we feel that there might be a conflict. Next slide. So that 106 action is that appeal that I was talking about. That's how we're talking about that deference that the courts give. If a quasi-judicial board does make a ruling, granting a license, they're denying a license, they're revoking a license, they're upholding a personnel action, anything that the boards actually make decisions on, planning decisions, any ultimate final decision can be appealed to a state district court, Colorado State District Court, on what is called a 106 action. The reason it's called a 106 action is because that's the section of the Colorado Civil Rules of Procedure that allow for the appeals from a local body or quasi-judicial body, so that someone can really have another court look at it and say, this was not right. But as I stated, you get deference, and that's something that has to be done quickly. It has to be done within 28 days of the ruling. So it's not like you're going to get a ruling that comes back to bite you 6 months later with someone appealing it and you don't know what to do because you don't remember what happened or we have new board members. It happens very quickly to get it filed. And at that point in time, that's when the legal representative lets you know it's filed now. Nothing in state courts really gets done quickly. So I think our 106 action with the Special Permanent License Board took almost a year. It was, well, I guess it was about March to November time frame. So it took a while to get it finalized, but the city does have insurance through an insurance pool, and those people actually handle the case for us, so that we're not involved internally. It's only allegations for quasi-judicial, so advisory boards, you cannot appeal those decisions because they don't actually have any binding effect. They're just advice. And they're only looking as to those legal aspects. Did you exceed your jurisdiction? Were you not allowed to actually revoke something, a license, or were you not allowed to deny a specific plan? Did you go above and beyond what municipal code or state statutes allow? Or did you abuse your discretion, which really comes down to the same type of thing. Not that they would decide that the case differently, but did you actually go above and beyond what you are allowed to consider? So an example is maybe you're only allowed to consider 3 factors, and yet in your decision, when you come down to denying something, you cite 5 different factors that aren't even related to the 3 you were supposed to look at. That's what they're looking for, to say, did you actually consider what you were supposed to consider, or did you go above and beyond, or use alternate factors to decide that? It's a very high standard to overcome. So they really, it has to be even like above negligence. It has to be something that's you really went above and beyond to make sure that you were finding something outside of what you're legally allowed to. And that's what the city attorney's office counselors will help you with. Make sure that they kind of get you on track to make sure that you're not making decisions that aren't supported by the factors you need to consider. The biggest key with the 106 action is that the better record you make, the more evidence you have on record, the more likely the court is going to uphold your decision. Now, to give you the examples of this, we had the Special Permit and License Board had a cabaret license, which is a dance hall license that was applied for. And they had 4 different factors that they considered: the needs and desires of the neighborhood, the management of who is going to manage the establishment, the character of the applicant, and whether or not there are any criminal background or anything else that they could deny on. Everything is typical in those hearings, that we have a report that tells us that there's a need and desire. We have a criminal report says that nothing's there. So really it came down to the character of the applicant and the management of the applicant. And there was a lot of testimony and questioning from the board about who was going to manage, when they were going to manage, what was going to happen if they weren't actually present on the site, if they were sick or vacation. And there were answers that weren't really up to the board's desires for granting the license, and they ultimately denied it. One of the things I did to make sure that we had that great record for when we go up to an appeal was to make sure that not only are we just asking the questions and getting the testimony on the record, but making findings by the board members. Board members should be giving their opinions or their statements of why they're voting no, if they're voting no. And again, also why you're voting yes, if you're voting yes, because it can be appealed either way. But really giving that indication of why you are voting no and connecting it back to the factors you're supposed to be considering, give the state court, state district court who's reviewing an appeal, the insight into why you did what you did, as opposed to just speculating as to why you denied it, whether or not it was based on factors you're allowed to do or based on outside factors. Now, there were certain things that were talked about that were outside of those 4 things that I listed. But as long as we have evidence to say that those 4 items that were, those 4 areas that we could consider were considered and were a factor in denying the license, we had a good enough record to give to the court to uphold our decision. The court, when someone does appeal, the court only gets the recordings. They transcribe it. They get those transcriptions of what was stated at the hearing, both in testimony as well as the board's deliberations after testimony. There is no extra opportunity for the board to come back and say, well, this is what I was actually thinking during that time, to clarify. They get what happened at that meeting, and they have to base their decision on whether to uphold it or decide if you've gone above and beyond your authority based on that record. So that's why it's very important to make that record and to give your opinion as to the reasoning why you are denying, or the reason why you are approving whatever it is, or making whatever decision you are making in your ruling. Now, there are some boards, such as the Personnel Board, that make written findings, and that's even more helpful. But a lot of times, some of the Planning Commission, the Special Permit License Board, are doing these orally at the hearing. So it's very important to get your reasoning behind why you're voting the way you are. In City Council, if you've ever watched their meetings, they do a very good job about that as to why they support whatever they're going to do or why they are voting no on something. And that's something that's important to take into consideration for these quasi-judicial boards, because you're acting on behalf of City Council as well, and you want to make sure that you do not get overturned on a 106 action. Next slide. So how do things come before your board? Because it is quasi-judicial, because you are acting essentially as in a judicial capacity on behalf of City Council, everyone that has some action before them has to have due process. They're seeking to have actions before the board to determine if they're going to grant or deny or approve or reject or make a decision. They need to have due process, the ability to be heard, the ability to have notice of a hearing and have the public present, or any witnesses that they may want if it's allowed by the board. That notice that Abby talked about is in our code on where we need to publish that and how much notice we need to give. Some boards have the ability to change that notice area. Some just follow the municipal code. I know that in the Special Permanent License Board, we vote each year on where to have it, and that's usually done by the staff liaison who tells us where they would like to post that. And that has changed for COVID because we no longer have people coming to City Hall to see those postings. So we want to make sure that they still know about that and have moved that on to the website as well. A public hearing is held to allow that entity, that individual or applicant, that opportunity to be heard, and that's their due process in that situation. We're not just rubber stamping. We're not just making decisions based on application. We're actually hearing and allowing them to present whatever they need to do to support their application or their whatever they're coming to the board for. Next slide. So because this is a quasi-judicial, we're acting, like I said, as kind of like a courtroom or city council. City council is also bound by these same types of rules with ex parte communication, which is a legal term for communications with only one party outside of the actual hearing. You are restricted from having ex parte communications. This means that if an applicant has applied for a license or a plan to be posed, board members cannot go outside of that meeting before the meeting or before they make a decision and talk to that applicant and say, hey, what are you really trying to do here? Or what are your plans? And try and get more information before the hearing. That is ex parte communication that is with only one party. The other parties could be the public, people who are opposed to this. We don't know who the other parties are as easily as we typically would with a court case where there's one side, there's two sides, and those are the two parties. So really the quasi-judicial board, you cannot go and talk to an applicant or anyone related to that particular issue beforehand. You need to base your decision and get your information from people directly through that hearing. Now that doesn't mean that you can't go out and do research on your own. If you want to use Google Maps to figure out what the location looks like, or you want to go visit the site and see what that looks like. That's not ex parte communication because you are not communicating with anyone, but you cannot be asking questions and talking to people related to an application outside of the actual hearing. So it'd be unfair to receive that, especially if only part of the board receives that. So that's ex parte communication. Don't do it. Next slide. I think I'll go over this again. Matt Munch did this in the advisory board, but I think we have different people here that weren't a part of that. And if you were, I apologize for having to go over it again, but we are subject to the Colorado Open Meetings Law, which is also referred to as the Sunshine Law. It requires that all meetings in a local body of 3 or more members where public business is to be discussed be open to the public. It's only 2 people or more if it's a state body, but because we are a local public body, it increases to 3 people. Purpose of that law is to make sure that public policy and public business is not conducted in secret and help with transparency for the public to access the government. What this means is that if you are meeting and you're talking about anything related to your board, it needs to be noticed by your liaison. It needs to be open to the public and held at least 24 hours after that notice is presented. It does not mean that you have to allow public comment, but it has to be open to the public to be able to view and see what is going on and the decision-making rationale behind any decisions that are made. This also includes telephone calls, emails, or meeting in public as well. So if you're going to discuss an application or discuss something that's happening in the board with anyone else on the board, do not email that to more than one other person, because once you email that to 2 people, including yourself, that makes 3 people, and that is subject to the Colorado open meeting law. And likely on an email, you haven't noticed the public that you're going to start an email chain. So it's important that anything related to business, if there is some business discussed, you are not doing that unless there's been a notice and an actual meeting set up. This doesn't mean that you can't socialize with each other afterwards. If you're not talking about business, you want to go to have coffee or drinks or whatever it is, you can do that as long as you're not discussing public business at that time. Next page, next slide. All of the boards and committees, especially the quasi-judicial here, are subject to that law. And as it shows that advisory is not necessarily subject to that because they're not making any public business or public decisions on that. But we still follow this. We still make sure that they are, well, I'm going to take that back. Because the advisory boards do advise city council and certain actions could be taken by city council, advisory boards, it's kind of a gray area in law, and we want to make sure we're not on the wrong side. So we make sure that our advisory boards are also conducting their meetings as open meetings so that there's no allegations that the factors leading to whatever decision city council makes, the advisory committee were behind closed doors. We want to be as transparent as possible because I think that our citizens deserve that, and so does the Colorado open meetings laws. Administrative meetings between staff liaison and board members are not required to be open. It's only when board members are discussing public business and there are 3 or more people on that. Next slide. So again, 3 components that you need to be aware of: that public notice, that those meetings are open, and then the last one that your liaison, your staff liaison will work on is making sure that we have meeting minutes that show exactly what has happened on the prior meetings, and those are voted on at each future meeting to make sure that they are accurate, make sure that everyone who is in attendance is properly noticed, and making sure that that is available to the public so they know what was discussed, and make sure that you know, if they find something that wasn't discussed that's voted on later that was, they have an opportunity to speak up and be heard and say, you know, I don't think that's what was described, if they want to come to a future meeting. Next slide. So as I stated, essentially all meetings that you have are going to be subject to the open meetings laws. They're going to be open and public meetings. They must be open to the public. And as I stated, in-person, phone, email, texts, these types of video conferences, all of those have to be noticed to the public. Now we can have these Skype video conferences, and as I stated, public comment doesn't have to be accepted if that's not in the bylaws for your board. But typically what we will always have is someone taking minutes or recording of these so that they are available to the public to view. And they have access to view it at the time that it's actually happening. So next slide. There are certain few exemptions from the open meetings law. Like I said, if you're having coffee or drinks or dinner or whatnot, and you're not discussing public business, that is not subject to open meetings. The staff communications to you are not open meetings. And then there are executive sessions. Now, there are very few options for executive sessions that can be used, but there are times where you can go to an executive session during a meeting, which would, or publicly noticed before a meeting, that would allow you to discuss things as a board and public policy, public business, so long as they fall into essentially 3 categories. There are employment issues, personnel issues. So as far as the personnel board goes, this would not be something you could go to executive session when it's a hearing about a personnel issue that's at hand. But a lot of times, such as on city council, if there is a personnel issue that needs to be discussed about one of their contract employees, they can go to executive session to have that discussion if necessary. To gain legal advice is another reason. So if the board wants to ask for legal advice on what they can or cannot do, or how what their options are, you can go into an executive session for that reason. One of the big things you need to remember, though, is that if you know you're going to have those questions, you know you're going to have issues where you need to have an executive session, it should be noticed as early as possible. Sometimes you don't know until you're in the hearing, and so you have to make a motion to go to executive session. It has to be voted on by the board according to the bylaws or the code, which is typically a 2/3 vote to agree to go into an executive session, in which case you'll be there with your advisory counselor from the city attorney's office or outside counsel, the liaison, and that executive session has to have minutes made for it. It has to have those minutes kept for 90 days. So it's not like everything's just completely private. And then if somebody does file something asking for that information, that might be released if it's determined that it didn't really fall into those categories that it can have an executive session. But we do have cards in the city attorney's office on how to make that motion. So if you feel that you want to have those ahead of time, we can get you those. It's a really easy template on how to make the motion, how to what the reasons are for it, and it's a really handy tool, especially for our quasi-judicial boards if you feel that you might be needing that. Next slide. I think we're getting right to the end here. So the conflicts of interest. So because you are making decisions on behalf of city council members will also excuse themselves or recuse themselves when there is a conflict of interest. So when you are having a hearing as a quasi-judicial board, conflicts of interest should be stated up front before any kind of testimony is presented, and make sure that there is, really, we want to put all of our issues up front, make sure that there's no conflicts that the board sees, that the applicant sees, or that we think would just be better to have that person sit out. Now, under our code, you have to be present and vote on everything unless there is a conflict of interest. If you are present, you can't abstain, essentially. You want to make sure that the conflicts are laid out right away to make sure that you don't later say, well, I'm not voting because I think there's a conflict of interest. Sometimes there may be a conflict of interest that you don't know about that comes up during the hearing. And I would advise that you always speak up as soon as you know there's a conflict. If it does come up, just speak up and explain exactly what it is and why you didn't know about it before and why you found out about it or what brought it to your attention. Some things that are conflicts of interest are actions that serve in your personal interest rather than public. So if you have a connection to a business that's applying for a license or some kind of stake or let's say stocks or some financial interest in that or some personal connection with the applicant, those are things that you should bring to the attention, and that would likely be a conflict of interest. Any financial aspect would obviously always be conflict of interest, but knowing someone doesn't necessarily mean there's a conflict unless there's a much closer tie that would keep you from being impartial. If you have, like I said, if you have financial or you personally are going to gain from what they do, that is a conflict of interest. Make sure you recuse yourself. We don't want to have something come back and say we have to redo the hearing all over again because somebody actually did have some kind of conflict of interest and we need to redo it because they voted on this. So always err on the side of over disclosure. If the board and the applicant feel that that's not really something that is a conflict of interest, you can still proceed. However, if anyone does feel that it's a conflict of interest, you should probably recuse yourself for that hearing. Next slide. Yeah, I thought that was the last one. So that's all I have. I know it's a repeat of what we talked about last time, but I know there are new people on boards, and it's always good to get a refresher. And I know that my members of the SPLB come back to a lot of the trainings a lot of times and still pick up something that maybe they forgot. So I hope that all of you have at least gotten something out of this. And as Matt Munch said in his earlier one, I know that legal trainings and legal aspects are not always the most exciting topics for everyone, but I hope you got something out of this, and I'm open to any questions.
Ron, we have a question from, or an ask from Councilor Bowles. Could you speak briefly about ex parte law and how city councilors shouldn't discuss land use matters outside of public hearings and attend meetings such as planning commission if uses are being considered?
Yeah, so this is something that we've talked about for the last few years. When planning commission is going through their hearings, typically what happens is then it goes up to city council afterwards, so that city council can make a decision above and beyond that. So all the meetings are open to the public. So technically city councilors can still be present and still participate as liaisons. However, someone can always challenge whether or not somebody has more information than they should, and whether or not they're making decisions that were outside of the record that's presented before the board at that time or before city council at that time. So although it is a matter of public, it's a public hearing, it's a matter of public knowledge. The city attorney's office has advised city councilors that they should not attend these hearings that are open, these hearings from planning commission, so that they can hear everything for the first time and make a full decision based on the record that is presented before them. Now that 106 action can come back, and that's the reason that we advise that they don't become involved in anything if they're going to have a hearing that they're going to listen to later, is because the only record that is going to be presented on a 106 action is the record of the decision-making body, which would be the city council at that time. If a councilor has been a part of the planning commission open meetings or as a liaison and listening and brings up some testimony or some aspects of the planning commission hearing that were not presented to city council, that could be something that is considered a factor that was above and beyond the record, above and beyond the authority to consider, because it wasn't presented as part of the record. So that's why the city attorney's office has advised that it's probably just best to avoid that type of situation. If city council is going to vote on something that a quasi-judicial board moves forward to city council, to not be involved at that time beforehand, so that they are in the same position as the rest of city council. Hopefully that answers your question, Councilor.
He did say thank you. So if you have any follow-up questions, Councilor Bowles, just let me know. I do have another question for you from our audience. Somebody wrote in, I recall being told if we make notes on a piece of paper, we may need to turn those in if someone appeals. Would we be required to keep them for 28 days?
So actually, it doesn't have necessarily to do with an appeal, because that's not part of the record that can be considered on an appeal. However, this is something that Matt went over that I don't really go over quasi-judicial, because we don't deal with it as much as advisory, but we are also subject to the Colorado Open Records Act, which is called CORA for short, which does mean that any member of the city, which would include all the board members, any writings or productions that anything that we produce has to be kept for CORA purposes. So if you are keeping notes on certain things, then yes, we would need to keep them. We need to keep them for longer than 28 days, actually. We need to keep them, I believe, for a minimum of 2 years. So if you are making notes, please let your liaison know that you are taking notes and keeping them for a period of time. And if you just want to make copies and turn them over to your liaison and then destroy them, that's okay. But yeah, you are subject to the Colorado Open Records Act for anything that you do create. So those notes will be subject to that as well.
That's the last question I see in the chat, but if people still have questions, please put them in the question box. And Ron, if you would hang on the line for a little bit, just in case we have others come in. But at this time, I'd like to ask council to turn on their cameras and join us so they can introduce themselves to the quasi-judicial board members and tell them a little about yourself. I'm going to just call on you in the way I see you. So, Councillor Scully, would you kick us off?
Oh, I'm happy to. Thank you, Abby. First of all, thank you to the staff for a great presentation. This is always a lot of information to intake, and it's great to have some experts who can really help us address those questions. And thank you to all of you for attending tonight and taking the time to learn about this. Again, I've been on your side where it's the first time I'm hearing it, and it's a lot to intake. So always feel like you can reach out to the staff and ask them questions. Thank you for your service and your work to our commissions and boards. These are really important roles in our city, and we really rely on you to help guide us in our decision making. So thank you for your service, and we appreciate you a great deal. I'm Councillor Catherine Scully, and thank you very much.
Great. I'll go next. My name is Anita Seitz. I'm the Mayor Pro-Tem for Westminster. I've been on City Council 7 years. And as such, I have served as the council liaison for multiple boards, including Planning Commission, Human Service Board, Environmental Advisory Board, Parks, Recs, Libraries, Open Space, and I'm sure I'm forgetting one. But I did want to say that I know tonight this amount of information can be overwhelming. Our goal is to take away some of that anxiety by giving you information so you know how to serve the city in a way that protects the city, protects yourself, and make sure there's fidelity in your decisions and in your rulings. I know City Manager Don Tripp said it earlier, but I know every single member of council would agree with me. We are incredibly appreciative that you have taken your time, your energy, and your talents to serve this community. We as a council benefit from your rulings. The community benefits from your rulings, and so you make our job easier and have the fingerprint of the community on your decisions. So thank you. It's a big responsibility, but we appreciate your efforts.
Councillor Rich Seymour, just want to also thank you. Appreciate your time tonight. I serve as the liaison for the Personnel Board and Special Permits and Licensing, the two best boards. So I could say that since we're in this meeting, but thank you for your time. We truly appreciate everything that you do for us. Thank you.
Well, Councillor Seymour, you took my thunder because I serve on the best boards, which is the Historic Landmark Board and the Elections Commission. So again, thank you all for joining us and participating in our community. Your thoughts and perspectives are very helpful for us as council members. It adds a layer of diversity for all of us in looking at things a different way. So thank you for everything you do for our community. It's much appreciated. I wish I could see all of your faces. I feel like I'm just talking to a computer screen here, but I just want you to know that I am so grateful for everything that you do for us. And thank you.
Hello, I'm John Voles. And I want to thank you also for being here tonight and all your work and what you do to make our city the kind of place we want to live in and live and play. So thank you for all your work that you do. It's very important to making our city the kind of place we all want to live. Before coming on council, I served on the Inclusivity Board for a few years. So I kind of know the routine and the fun and the ups and downs. So thank you for all your hard work. I am the liaison on council to the Planning Commission, the Human Services Board, and the Environmental Advisory Board. and I must say, the best boards in the city, counselors. So anyhow, thank you very much, and I'm glad we were all here together tonight. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for attending tonight. I understand your time is valuable, and this kind of setting is not always the most warm and friendly, but I think the information is really important. And I want to thank Ron for his presentation. I thought it was really important and informative. And also thank you to council for coming and spending your evening with us as well. So everyone, have a good evening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out by email or phone. Thank you.
Good night, Abby.
Good night.